Dean, welcome back to This Is Horror Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me back. I thought I had worn out my welcome, but here I am.
Well, it is the third in the trilogy, so we're excited to see what happens here. And as per the previous time, I want to know what the biggest changes have been for you in the last 7 months since we spoke.
I'm writing and always doing the same thing. So not much has changed. I've got 2 books in inventory waiting to be published and a new one out. And there you go. It's a boring life here. I live inside my head, not anywhere else.
And I mean, your latest book, The Bad Weather Friend, it came out literally a few weeks ago, I believe. I mean, it was out earlier for people who were part of the Amazon book club, I believe. But in terms of the wider release, it is now out for everyone to buy. Could you give us the elevator pitch just for those who are not familiar with it?
Well, it's a story about a fellow named Benny who is basically too nice for his own good. And one day his life falls apart. He loses his job, he loses his fiance, all of his business contacts won't return his calls, and his favorite chair is destroyed. And Benny's life looks like it's in ruin. And then a salvation expert, let's say, shows up to put it back on track.
A salvation expert, and we will be talking about that salvation expert imminently. But I want to go before the actual story. There is a dedication to Dr. Kim Swanson. So, who is Dr. Kim Swanson?
He's a doctor of mine, and I developed some AFib from having taken the COVID vaccine. They won't accept that, but every doctor I know who is smart agrees that it's happening all the time. So I'm a healthy guy. Don't have problems, and so it's a little terrifying when you suddenly have this problem that needs addressed, and it's related to your heart. I've always had problems related to my brain, but I deal with those myself. And he was just the most astonishing, kind, and special man. And I've never known a doctor to give me his office number, his home number, and his cell phone, and it says, call anytime. And it's not just because I'm a little bit of a celebrity. I've come to understand he does that with everybody. So it seemed that was worth a book. He solved my problem. Life went on as if it never happened. And it's better than donating it yet. Well, I won't say that. I've dedicated about 50 books to my wife, so I think she can get by with having this one not dedicated to her.
There you go. And I mean, it's, yeah, so great to have that level of care, and unfortunately, so unusual, really, to have a doctor go to that level. And I mean, that brings us to this idea of being nice, which is central to the book. And I mean, how much do you think that in reality people are punished for being too nice? And how do we balance being a good person without becoming somebody who can just be a pushover and be taken advantage of?
Well, as the salvation expert makes clear to Benny, it's great to be nice. We need more of that. But don't be so nice you're a fool. And it's finding that balance between them. But the original impetus with this book is you're both living in different countries than I am. And as a consequence, I don't know if this will resonate or not. But in the US these days, a great many of us, I would say the vast majority, think that the ruling class doesn't give a damn about everybody else. And that was what I wanted to write a book about somebody who's a nice guy and gets targeted for no apparently good reason, because it happens a lot these days. And, uh, and then explore that with the members of the ruling class he encounters. And that's sort of where the idea came from. And it's also sort of retelling of the Job story. And it was, I've got to say, a great fun to write. I was laughing out loud so often during the writing that it almost didn't seem like work, but I'll still take pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I mean, it's easy to see why this is one of the most fun books that you've written, because I mean, it's such a fun read, and it's such a comedic read, and there's not only jokes, but there's breaking of the fourth wall as well. Which when you first did that, I thought, wow, you're just breaking all of the literary conventions and rules here. But it works. It not only works, but it somehow makes it even better. It just completely fits and complements the tone.
When I delivered the book, well, thank you first, but when I delivered the book to my publisher and editor, uh, I assumed they would come back and say, well, first thing is you got to go through and change this. You can't break the fourth wall and start talking to the reader. But to my great surprise, it was one of the things they loved the most. And my editor said, can you do more of this? And so I had to come up with a few places to be able to do more of it without disturbing the story. And I found I liked it so much and that they liked it so much. I've delivered a book now called Going Home in the Dark. And I do it much more than I do in this book. And my editor has just given me notes I address, says this is her favorite book of all the ones we've worked on together. So it's just kind of different. And it's amazing to me that people like it so much. But on the other hand, I think it makes the book, the author reader relationship more intimate. Uh, and I'm very glad I dared to do it because it's had such a positive response.
So, with this also being included in the forthcoming book, does that mean that this could be a kind of regular, something that you're going to do again and again? I mean, I imagine too that it will probably depend on the kind of genre and how it is tonally, because I think more comedic is probably going to work better.
Yes, yes, I think so. I can't break the fourth wall and say, as the villain here has done, I have killed people also, and that would be a bad use of breaking the fourth wall. So it tends to be comic novels that I think it works in, and Going Home in the Dark is uh, not to jump ahead 2 years, but it's a story of four friends who were nerds in high school and and had bad families and only survived because they had each other. And they called themselves the Four Amigos. And now they're 35 and some are all sort of successful. Three have left, one's at home, and then something bad happens in this small town, and they all have to get together again. And it's a little spooky, but it's also comedic, and it gave me a lot of opportunity just to step in and out of the story. Then I have another one called The Forest of Lost Souls, and you might know from that title, it wouldn't allow itself of a fourth wall break.
Yeah. Well, last time you said that you hadn't killed anyone. Now you're hinting that perhaps you have. So I think
No,
you're
I'm
just.
not hinting. You made me laugh for days afterward with that comment you made. Right?
Yeah. But yeah, the Forest of Lost Souls, it doesn't sound like a laugh a minute in terms of the book. But I mean, we've spoken specifically to talk about three different releases, and each time we get something that's completely different, or almost completely different. There's always struggle against power. That's going to be a concern, a kind of hatred for authority. But in terms of the aesthetic and the genre, I mean, that they're just very, very different. And is the Forest of Lost Souls, is that the next one coming?
Yes, it's the next one after this, and it's. I won't go into what it is. It's a little too early to talk
Yeah.
about it, but yeah, delivering a different book, uh, still within the same sort of author voice,
Mm.
has always been what I did, and publishers have often absolutely hated it. I probably talked about that before. And I've had struggles that lasted months when I was told, this can't be published, it'll destroy your career. And I'm not one who wants to destroy his career, so I always listen to that, but it never has actually happened. And my current publisher seems to flow really well with something new and different. So I had to wait until I was this advanced age to find that, but it's kind of glorious right now.
Yeah, I'm wondering, with such a breadth of work within like all genres, I wonder if it is because, of your proven track record, or I wonder if publishers in general are allowing authors to branch out more. I don't know if that's something you can easily comment on, being that you are only yourself rather than a multitude of authors.
Well, as far as you know, I am
It's-
a
y-
multiple personality. Uh, so I may be living six lives and you only know about one. But I'm not confirming that. I'm only saying it's a possibility. And uh, yeah, I'm not so sure. I think it's still a hard deal for a lot of writers to move uh, up and down the scale into different areas. When I first started just simply mixing genres, which was a long, long time ago, nobody was doing it, and publishers just had no patience for it at all. But now that part is not uncommon. You get these what they now call mashups sometimes, and and now there's never an objection to that. But I think even if you're doing mashups, they want you probably to do the same mashup every time. There's something about marketing folks who are among the saints of the planet, of course, but also that they don't want the parameters to change too much because they have their marketing system all set up for you and they want to not have to make changes. So that I've got a place where editorial publishing and marketing are all fine with it, I think is unique. It may be a couple of few others out there get away with it as easily as I'm getting away with it. Although now that I'm bragging about getting away with you, my publisher will probably put a stop to that. But yeah, I don't think it's as easy for most people as it's become for me to get away with it.
Yeah, you gotta be careful what you say, because Amazon could be listening, and we don't know what the consequences will be. And you spoke about billionaires and the kind of things that they'll do. I mean, I love, there's a bit that I've taken this quote where you're talking about evil billionaires. Now, I'm not saying Amazon is an evil billionaire. That is a company anyway, not an individual. But it says in the book, they're people who can't let anything be as it is. No matter how good the thing is, it's never good enough for them. Everything they look upon seems either not quite right or wrong, and they're convinced they know how to fix it. Most of the time, they utterly destroy it before rebuilding something less good from the rubble. And as soon as I read that, I thought, well, you could apply that to many instances and many situations in like kind of pop culture and with billionaires right now, even to the point where I don't need to name a specific one because it could apply to, about 10 or 20, but it was, yeah, so precise.
Well, I've never had the iron fist of Mr. Bezos come down on me. So I don't think he's particularly concerned about anything I write. But not that I know him or anything, but there's that theme is we're living in a time where wealth is accumulated in fewer hands than I think any time in history, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't care how wealthy you are, you're still human, and we all screw up. It's the nature of humanity and humankind to screw up. But it gets more dangerous when somebody has the wherewithal to screw up in a very big way. And that's sort of what's run through with Benny and his situation.
Yeah, and you've said before that there's an even larger class division now than there was when you were growing up. So I'm wondering, what do you attribute this to? And do you think, as a society, there's anything we can do about it? Do you think this is going to keep widening, or is there going to come a point where actually it goes back the other way?
Well, I'm heartened to see that there's some reaction, uh, not just here, but all over the world against being told what to do by people who don't know your business. Like all these protests of farmers in Europe right now, being told how to grow a crop and what to do and what not to do by people who've never grown a crop. And finally, farmers saying, wait a minute, just because you've ended up in this position of authority doesn't mean you're a farmer. And it's surprising to me how long it's taken so many people in so many professions to say it isn't a matter of left or right, it's a matter of class. And certain people in the upper elite class are determined that they know better. But I'm heartened to see a turnaround in that. I think it'll take quite a long time because it's taken a long time to get here. But I think in the course of it, you'll see a lot of things that are now important to people advancing. For instance, in this country, what university you went through is rapidly turning out to be not a plus, but a minus when some of these university presidents turn out to be pushing anti-Semitism and can't acknowledge it. It's just opened a window to a lot of people where they thought a lot of thought and responsibility could be found is absolutely not the place to find it. And as people wake up, I think this could all change. I don't expect to live long enough to see the end result, but everything in human affairs swings on a pendulum, essentially. And I would hope, I think it's a great material for this book or for others that this is happening in society. And almost nobody comments about it in a significant way. And it's a great comic material because you're dealing with, I would just say, one billionaire used to be mayor of New York. His biggest thing for 2 years was trying to tell people what size soft drink they could buy. It could be no more than 12 ounces, and 16 ounces had to be outlawed. And he spent fortunes on making that happen. And you think, I've got some better things you could be doing with that money. So it's interesting, fascinating stuff. And it gives you material that as a writer, I think is really wonderful stuff to have. That sounds like I'm saying, I love it when society begins to collapse because I have more to write about, but that is not exactly how I mean it.
No, no, I
Mm.
think I understand your intention there, and yeah, the soft drinks thing is utterly bizarre and kind of
Mhm.
as bizarre as trying to regulate the shape of a banana, which was something that happened in the UK a few years ago.
Are you kidding? I have to hear about that one day.
Yeah, I'll have to send you some some articles to show you what I'm talking about here. Put some links in the show notes for people too.
Mhm.
Well,
I remember reading something that Goldman said, screenwriter years ago, that basically, dealing with Hollywood and the elites in there, that no one knows what they're doing at all. And I think what's happened now is we have, these very, very rich people who have taken that statement and made it a feature, not a bug. They've said, "Hey, no one knows what they're doing. I've got enough money to sway people in my direction. So even though I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to make these things happen." It's like they're
yes.
saying the quiet part out loud. And there needs to be more people who are experts who know what they're doing in positions of leadership. So I don't know how it's going to end up, but that's to me that is what needs to happen in society, and we're
Well,
not seeing it.
no, we're not seeing
Mhm.
it.
No.
But I have to back up and saying you mentioned William Goldman. I absolutely love his novels. He wrote some fantastic novels, uh,
Mhm.
and was a singular talent. Wrote a book called The Color of Light that is an unbelievable novel about the mistake of listening to what writing courses tell you. Write only what you know, and the lead character of this novel makes the great mistake of only being able to write about what he knows. And where this leads him is he doesn't realize you can research things, you can learn about things. He takes it, you have to live your life in such a way to provide material. And it's pretty darkly funny novel. But yeah, and and Goldman said, nobody knows anything and nobody knows what they're doing or what works. And in Hollywood, that's certainly the case. But it's also the case in a great many areas of society. When you start thinking about it, uh, uh, it's kind of amazing that humanity has come this far and bumbles through. But we have thousands of years. So I'm confident we'll bumble through another thousand, maybe. I just hope it's not another two.
Yeah, and I want to shift back to what comes out of the box in the bad weather friends. So, I mean, I'm assuming we can talk a little bit about that, as there's many questions. So we've got a craggle that turns up now. How would you define a craggle, or would you just not decide to define a craggle?
Well, I don't usually go into what I would call fantasy. I sometimes bring science fiction into it. I've certainly brought horror into it and other things, but rarely fantasy, which to my mind was, you know, I may like to read it, but I just didn't understand writing it. But Spike, the Craggle, is a figure of fantasy, he's a supernatural creature. Uh, and you're not going to have any scientific explanation for his existence. But when Benny's whole life falls apart, at the same time, he gets this uh, little video card from an uncle he didn't even know he had, saying, "I'm sending you an inheritance, and it's coming, and there's no reason to be afraid. There is no reason to be afraid." It may take you a long time to figure that out, but there's no reason to be afraid. So when the inheritance arrives, it's a giant crate about 9 feet long and 4 foot wide and 3 feet deep. And in the crate is Spike the Craggle. And just Spike has been around for 1,800 years. He may not be the oldest Craggle in the Craggledom, but his job is to deal with people who are just too nice, but the world needs some people who are too nice. And it's his job when the bad people come along to wreck their lives, the lives of the nice people. Spike shows up and straightens it all out. But his methods of straightening it out are, shall we say, pretty intimidating.
Yeah, and I like that he's 7 foot because certainly imposing enough that you're presumably not going to try and mess with Spike, but also not so tall that you would absolutely assume this is a supernatural entity. So, you could confuse him for a human, in fact.
He has the ability to look less human at certain times,
Yeah.
but yeah, he has to pass for one of us. My film agent has suggested people to play Spike, and I've thrown a few names in. But when they talk about it in Hollywood, or at least my agent, it's been interesting, and I've had my head come around to this point of view. It doesn't have to be played by somebody who's very tall and muscular. It has to be played by somebody who could be incredibly intimidating. And my agent said, "What would you think of Jack Black?" And I said almost at once, "Oh, yeah, he could be totally intimidating." And somebody like, we're never going to get Jack Black, but Joe Pesci. Remember Joe Pesci out of those Goodfellas, the most intimidating character you can imagine, and he's about 5'6". So yeah, it's all about how an actor would play it, and he would still have these little tricks he can do, which are pretty intimidating. So yeah, I fell in love with Spike. I sort of fell in love with this whole cast, and Spike's desire to have a cat is very endearing, I think.
Like Jack Black it's so different from how I imagined Spike in the book, but it also completely works. It's like, Jack Black's command, his presence, his way of talking is a 7 foot way. It is like, yes, 7 foot of personality right there.
Yeah, I was surprised when she mentioned it. And then after I thought about it, for a little bit, it was like, well, that makes perfect sense. So that's why I don't cast movies. I would go for the obvious of Dwayne Johnson, who is 6'5" and built like a, but it isn't really necessary. It could be, depends on the actor and the personality they project. Not that I think this will get made as a film, but you never know.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed that it does. And I kind of want it to be made as a film now 3 different times just to see Joe Pesci, Jack Black, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, because they would be completely different movies, but they all work in just these different ways.
It's I've had a number of movies made where the casting was about as dumb as you can get. So I kind of react when I hear unusual casting that actually is very smart. So it's nice change.
Well, I mean, off air, we were briefly talking about the idea if we were to have a craggle. So, I mean, would you like to have a craggle? At what point in your life do you think it would have been best to have had a craggle? And then finally, because we've gone in this bizarre direction, if your craggle could be more like Jack Black, more like Joe Pesci, or more like Dwayne Johnson, which variety of craggle would you choose?
Well, I'll get back to that. But yeah, as soon as you said that, what period in my life would I? Well, it would have been nice very young when I lived in a bad house with my father for a craggle to take care of him. But that's not what I would choose now that I've got to this point. Where I could have really used a craggle to straighten me out and to uh, get my career on track was uh, my third agent, who ended up selling me out to my first major publisher and took terms below anything anyone else would have received. And ultimately had to acknowledge that she pretty much had stolen money from me. And I loved this person. And I thought she was great. And I'm sure Spike the Craggle would have straightened me out at the time. And that would have been a crucial time in my career. But yeah, if I had, I would just take a Craggle right now in any form. It could be Joe Pesci, it could be Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn would be a very good Craggle. And in any format. Right now, if I could have a Craggle, he wouldn't have that much to do to keep my life on track, but I could come up with things for him to do that would be very entertaining.
Yeah, I guess if you've got Vince Vaughn as well, you've got both the humor and the size. I feel just, yeah, because one hopes that there's not too much going on in their life that is going to mean that the Craggle needs to come into play. So you might as well have a Craggle with some jokes and a good personality.
Yeah, Spike is amusing, and that's a good thing with an enforcer.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I mean, another kind of element is the better kind. So, what is the origin story there? I mean, again, like we were saying before, feels very much based in reality. One could imagine the better kind to exist, in fact.
Well, the better kind are a number of these elites of very great wealth and very powerful positions who have developed some algorithm to identify people who are going to, by their personality and their influence on others, eventually put a disturbance into the river of plans that these people have. And they do believe they're a better kind. They're a better kind of humanity. They are a smarter kind of humanity. And they have this little club that call themselves the better kind. I think one of the great things that's so much fun with Spike is he kind of opens them to the idea that they really aren't, and with what he's able to do with them. Uh, so, yeah, that sort of comes out of the headlines we're dealing with. We have so much ego in the world of the elites today where they don't think they need to ask, what would you like to see happen? They think they can tell you what will happen and you will like it. And I don't see humankind dealing with that too long. I don't know if I even answered your question, but it's always fun in fiction to have some group of people who think they're very exalted and then come crashing down. I think we all like that. That's something that maybe it's a human fault to want to see the high and mighty brought down, but I think it's more of a preservation instinct than it is a fault of humanity.
Yeah, and I think, as we were saying before as well, there's a greater awareness these days of the corruption of power, and there are people becoming wise to these entities and not standing for it. So, in some form, hopefully, we're seeing a shift. I mean, we're not going to see such a shift that these entities and these conglomerations will never exist. But I think the awareness and the fight back is important just for our own humanity, really.
Yeah, it's freedom is important for the advancement of civilization. And when you don't have it, everything stagnates. Uh, and therefore, we need to press for the freedom. We have, certainly in most of the West, uh, uh, enjoyed for most of our lives. So to see that fade away is kind of an awful thing. But I don't think it will fade away. It'll go with, if it goes, it'll be less than a fade away. It will be an unpleasant thing, but losing it altogether will be the biggest unpleasant thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned before the story of Job, and indeed, you've also said that that there are many moments, not just in your own life, but in any life, where they are tragic. But then, when you look back on them, you can see some humor. You can see almost some comedy to them. So I'm wondering, are there any Job moments, for want of better phrasing, that spring to mind in terms of your own life?
Oh, there's so many of them. It was one of those revelatory moments in my life, I think, when I was telling someone about the circumstances. My mother was a great person, weak all her life because she was ill, but she was a great person. And losing her was a terrible thing. And she died young. I was 23 and she was 53. Uh, and there were, our family was dysfunctional. On my father's side, uh, seriously dysfunctional. On my mother's side, everybody arguing with everybody else over petty things and not speaking for 3 years. Serial sort of soap opera kind of family. And as a consequence, some years after my mother died, I was telling somebody about her funeral, and it turned out it was hilarious. There were all these stories of absurd relatives doing absurd things and getting into fights with each other and not really honoring the person who had just passed away. And it takes time often to look at something that was tragic in your life and then seeing swirl all around it this human behavior that is just funny. There's been a lot of very dark, funny movies, and they play on the same realization that almost everything you go with or that happens to you, if you wait long enough, if you live long enough, you can look back on it and laugh. And certainly my wife and I do. There's been a lot of bad things in life, but almost all of them are still funny when you look backward from the future. Or maybe
Yeah.
I'm just sick. I don't know.
Well, I tend to look for the humor in things as well. And yeah, it's difficult to know, is this because life is inherently comic, or is it because, you can either find it funny or you can just swim in a sea of nihilism? And I choose not to go for the latter. I mean, if I find humor, then it makes my life more pleasant, it makes it more enjoyable. And I think as well, it means that you're then not defeated by the bad things. You don't kind of perpetuate that cycle. So, in many ways, there's a self preservation to it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's why I've always gravitated toward funny stuff when I was a kid, Mad Magazine and all those equivalents. And just looking for what I can laugh at because it's a light in the darkness, basically. And I am still that way. I gravitate toward something comic more than I do the other. But, and a perfect example of what you're talking about was after I first, and it was many years after I'd been publishing, But I talked in an interview about my father, and that, he was in the psych ward twice, and he was diagnosed as eventually sociopathic, and he was a violent alcoholic and all that. And after I talked about it, I got all these letters from people saying, I had a childhood like that, and I'm 50, and I still can't get past it. And some of these letters were very long and very moving. But when I'd answer them, I would answer simply, you're going to have to learn to laugh at it and look backward and not look at it as tragedy, as something you survived. And when you survive something, you can find the humor in it. You can laugh about it. And if you don't, then you let the bastard win. And you don't want to let the bastard win. And I was surprised. I thought, this sounds very frivolous in an answer to these serious stories of their lives. But in reality, I got back over the years a number of letters saying, I never thought of it that way. You don't want to let the bastard win. And then you start to think of it in a different way. So, yeah, I don't know. I am so fortunate my wife has my same sense of humor, which tends to the absurd. And it's been important in both our lives.
And do you think, too, that in having a violent alcoholic father and in having quite a tumultuous start for your life, in some ways, has that kind of set the threshold high in terms of what you can endure? And I mean, so often people can get absorbed in pettiness or have disagreements over things that in the grand scheme of it all are not that important. But when you've been through something so chaotic and so traumatic, does it make it kind of harder to offend you and harder to upset you? Because it's like, look, try harder. This is what's happened to me. You're going to have to do a little bit better.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it is true. For the first few years we were married, my wife came out of her father was an Italian immigrant to this country and came with the old world values and attitudes and was a very stern man. And Julie would, when we were first married, be surprised that I didn't take offense at things she thought I should have taken offense at that people did or said. And it was exactly if you start taking offense at everything, life isn't very pleasant. So yeah, I have some people would say a thick skin. It doesn't, and you better when you're a writer because you're going to get some reviews from people who clearly didn't bother to read the book and disagree with you for some other reason and want to destroy you. And you just have to sort of shrug and say, move on. But, I think also I referred to my mother's family where everybody was constantly in petty warfare with each other. And I think that probably had as much to show me, boy, this isn't a way to live either. You don't get angry with people in your family because of their politics or because of their religion or because they just don't like pork and you do. It always amazed me that family members would stop talking to each other because of the disagreement they had over what, when you look back on it, was very petty. So probably that also influenced me to just shrug off a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I certainly relate to that. And sometimes I think it was much simpler during childhood when I didn't even really know about politics or all these things. And everyone was just, we were friends, we were playing in the playground, we had common humanity. And then as you become an adult, it's like, my goodness, life can get a lot more complicated if you let it.
Yes, simplifying your life is a major way to happiness, I think. And just not care, understanding what's worth caring about, and to care about too much things that are not really going to directly affect your own life simply because other people don't agree with you. I've lost a lot of acquaintances, I would say a few people I thought were friends, because we got to somewhere where they found out I didn't agree with them on one thing or another about life, politics, or whatnot. It didn't concern me that we didn't agree, but it did concern them. And if you go through life thinking you got to make everybody agree with you, you're not going to have a happy life, because they're not going to agree with you unless you're Stalin and you can put a gun to their head, and then they still won't agree with you.
Yeah, I tend to find that when there's something that I disagree with someone, I try to, have a conversation. Let's talk about it and let's find out what we both think. And the more that we question each other, the more that we ask, if we're doing it in a civil way, we actually find that we have more in common than we perhaps thought we did. And I do believe that the vast majority of people, they believe and they do things because they think it is the right thing to do, because they think it is the best thing to do. But it's just we're coming at it from different perspectives and different life experiences, but we're all human.
Well, if you go back a century or two, go back to the 1800s, you wouldn't have found the disagreement over so many petty things. Life was harder, and you might disagree on a few big issues, but you wouldn't get into arguments about uh, the things that we do today, or you watch people get in arguments about. I think there was more a sense of community as human beings that long ago. And now, with all the tech input that we have, social media in particular, I think, does a lot of damage, simply because it encourages people to split apart and then to contest with one another. And they've already admitted that's part of their algorithm, because it keeps people excited and involved. Well, being excited and involved is not necessarily the best thing in the world if you're excited about the wrong things and involved with the wrong people.
Yeah, I think when using social media, it's good to have an understanding as to what the algorithm is trying to do, and then you can, as best as possible, use it, for yourself so that it doesn't use you, to use somewhat cliched terms.
Yeah, it's well, that's one reason I do put up social media posts. I don't actually put them up. I write them, and my publisher manages all that, and I don't go online. I think I've told you that before, because I'm an obsessive personality, so I go online. Next thing you know, I'm spending all my time trying to find out where Taylor Swift is today.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of your answers in the Q&As that you do are very comedic as well. So if people enjoy that, then this new book is also one for them.
So, well, there's no Taylor Swift in it, but I think they may still like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And I mean, talking about different elements of the book, as you have done before, we kind of bounce between different time periods. So not only are we seeing what's happening in the present with Benny, but we get more of an insight into his childhood. We also get the bizarre time at the academy. And I mean, goodness, in terms of what happens to people there, first of all, nobody is going to guess what happens, whatever you're thinking, that it's not that. And it goes into this almost weird fiction Cronenbergian direction. And yeah, I absolutely love that you went there. But I mean, I'm wondering in terms of going between different time periods and different elements, how do you ensure that you do that without detracting from the kind of present narrative or slowing down the tension? Because you absolutely do it successfully.
I think I think it's because uh, I wanted to show why Benny became who he became, but I didn't want to do it in traditional flashbacks or that kind of thing. So I thought, well, just let me start doing scenes and let me tell the reader by the title of the chapter when it occurs, and they won't get confused. Uh, and then start with his death of his father, which has got its comic element to it, and then move forward. And when I came to the point where he was going to be sent to this boarding school, I almost just started rubbing my hands, saying, "I know I've loved a lot of novels that are set in boarding schools." And I thought this little closed environment is going to turn out to be very strange and contribute to Benny and allow you to meet the friends of a period in his life that had very profound, long lasting impact. But when I got into the boarding school, I knew something was going on there that had to be, well, maybe it is Cronenbergian, but that it was sort of over the top. But uh, I had great fun with those scenes, and I won't give anything away, but many of the times I was laughing the most were in those scenes in the back. And there's a moment where, in some solemn, supposedly solemn ceremony, three songs are involved, and one of them is from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And it was just the nature of that song and the title of it. I must have laughed for 10 minutes after that. And that's when I thought, okay, this is all kind of working in the strangest way. And I do a little of that in the book I mentioned, Going Home in the Dark. I address you, but I also move back and forward from the time these people were nerds in high school together until the present. And I'm finding it's just really works if what happened to them in the past and everything is equally as captivating or strange as what happened to them now. And they actually, one grows out of the other.
Well, as you mentioned music, I have a theory that every book now you're trying to get a very catchy song from the past into our head, a kind of earworm, because we mentioned before in the cherry orchard in After Death, you put a very famous song into our ears, but then again, just it just absolutely kind of caught me off guard. You're talking about Latin, and then suddenly there's a comparison that puts another song in my head. So, is this now a trick that you're going to be doing in every single book?
Well, it wasn't until you mentioned it, and I think it's a pretty good device. So now I probably will do it consciously. Thank you very much.
So, there you go, listeners who like it. You can be happy that I said that, and those that don't, you can be infuriated at me. So, might get some hate mail, but
That's
you
fun
know,
too.
yeah, it can be fun. Yeah. Well, talking about mail and fans, we've got a number of Patreon questions, and for once, I'm going to actually ask them now rather than at the hour mark say, "Oh, I've got some Patreon questions." So I've been organized this time. And we've got one from Brandon Wills, who simply wants to know, what advice would you give to authors who are just starting their careers?
It's, I would have to sit down with you for about a month to tell you all the things to look out for. So I'll boil it down to this. It, perseverance is as important as talent because talent will not always be recognized. And you have to just stay with it. If it turns out you don't have talent, well, you just have wasted part of your life. But it's the risk you always have to take. And if I had not had perseverance, I had publisher after publisher, agent after agent who would have made me stop or stop in a direction that turned out to be successful. You just can't expect that everyone you meet in the course of your developing a career is going to be giving you the best advice. So you have to kind of keep a clear head and say, I think I know what I'm trying to do, and take good advice, but not. That's one of the hardest things in life, is to know what's good advice and what's not when you're starting out in something, because you tend to believe the common wisdom of that business is wisdom, but it isn't often. It's just common. And so I would just say perseverance. You just don't give up. Uh, and if you gave up in life on anything, then it wouldn't be worth living. So it's not that hard to do.
Yeah. Have there ever been any moments where you've kind of faltered in your writing career, or you've considered giving up, and or anything kind of along those lines? And if so, what did you do to kind of get back on the path?
I've never had the feeling I should stop, or that I should listen to what I knew was bad advice just to get that person on my side. It's I'm a little bit bullheaded, and as a consequence, I'll just bash my head against a wall until the wall cracks. And I've never thought of. I have an attitude that when somebody tells me, as one agent did earlier, oh, you'll always be a mid-list writer, but you'll never be a bestseller, and you're trying to write the wrong kind of thing. And that just always incenses me. Uh, I take the opposite. I take that as encouragement, a sort of, well, I'll show you attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we covered before that nobody should tell you what you can't do, with the exception of the Ten Commandments, because you will then try to do exactly what you're being told not to do.
Yeah, that's not really wise. Murder is never a good thing. So if you're murdering people and you're told to stop, then you should listen.
Yeah. Well, there's some people, particularly if they've listened to all three of these conversations, may notice, well, Dean has confirmed a number of times that murder isn't good, and he said that he hasn't murdered someone. And is he overcompensating here? Is there something that is going on?
Well, I had to feed you that because of you calling me on it the last time
Yeah.
when you said, oh, you did say before you've never killed a child. Now you say you've never killed an adult. I think that's what you did, which I thought was very funny. So yeah, I think every time we talk, I'll make a confession to have not killed another kind of human being.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean that there might be a conversation where we never mention murder, and that will really surprise, regular listeners. But it hasn't happened so far. But we can see what happens with the next one. But given that you said the next book is up there with your darker works, we're probably going to be talking about murder.
Probably, yes.
Well, Tracy Kenworth would like to know, how do you introduce your characters so quickly and memorably that they snag the audiences right away? And then she's listed a number of characters that she particularly enjoyed, including the little boy that everyone thought was the Antichrist, the golden retriever from Watchers, and the recent agent who gave up. on her husband's suicide and had to go deeper to discover the truth.
Uh, again, it would take a long time to do, but I think there's one thing I can go back to. I am always aware that what you're going to remember most about a character is if you see in the early scenes, the character seems a little eccentric, has this aspect of his or her character that is amusing or interesting because it seems eccentric. That is a start of making a character kind of compelling and interesting. And I think what every writer should keep in mind is that every single human being is eccentric. We all are, each in our own way. And it's focusing on what that way is with that character. What about this character, if you were to exaggerate it a little and make it more eccentric, would turn it into a comic character. And so I'm always looking, what about that character is something, whoa, I wouldn't expect them to do that or think that. And then you've got a hook in that character that if you maintain, that eccentricity makes him interesting. That's the simplest way I could put it.
And along similar lines, Robert Stahl says, how do you skate the line in showing humanity at its best while also showing us what horrible depths we can sink to?
I have no idea. I do both how I can love humanity, but also recognize its potential for evil. I guess it's simply because I've experienced both, and you can flow between them if you make the effort.
Okay, well, thank you once again for joining us. This has been a tremendous amount of fun, as it always is. I know that both Bob and I love The Bad Weather Friend, and we're very much looking forward to the next book. So thank you again.
Well, thanks for having me on. That's always one of my fun things to do when I'm doing these Zoom interviews. The two of you are you're relaxing. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking to friends, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot, and the feeling is definitely mutual. So let's do this again for the next one.
Sounds good.